The house was too quiet that morning. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. The kind that settles in after something has already broken. I was standing at the kitchen window with my coffee going cold in my hand, looking out at the backyard I'd spent 32 years maintaining, the maple tree I'd planted when my son was born, the flagstone path I'd laid myself, one stone at a time the summer I turned 55. Everything I could see from that window, I'd built or grown or chosen, and none of it felt like mine anymore. That was the morning after my daughter-in-law handed me a document and told me to read it carefully. Her exact words, "Read it carefully," like I was a child who needed instructions for something simple. I should back up. My name is George Alderman. I'm 68 years old. I worked for 31 years as a civil engineer for the city of Edmonton, and I retired with a pension, no debt, and a clarity about money that most people don't develop until it's too late. My late wife, Carol, used to joke that I was the only person she knew who actually read the fine print. Every contract, every mortgage document, every insurance policy. She'd bring me tea and sit beside me while I read, and she'd say, "George, normal people don't do this." And I'd say, "Normal people get surprised." Carol died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to the end, and she was graceful through every single day of it in a way I still don't fully understand. We had 40 years together. I don't talk about her loss easily, and I won't linger on it here, except to say this. Losing her changed my relationship with time. You start to understand very clearly that the years you have left are not a resource to be wasted on people who don't deserve them. We had 2 children, our daughter, who lives in Vancouver with her husband and their 2 kids, and our son. He's the one this story is about. He's 41 now. He married his wife. I'll just call her my daughter-in-law because that's what she was, legally, for 9 years, when he was 32. They live in the house I helped them buy in St. Albert, just outside Edmonton, back in 2018. Helped is maybe too soft a word. I put in $260,000 toward the down payment on a house that cost just over $700,000. My son was making good money in oil and gas at the time. I thought it was a solid investment in their future. I thought a lot of things back then. What I didn't think, what never occurred to me even once, was that my generosity would eventually be used as evidence that I couldn't manage my own affairs. The document my daughter-in-law gave me was a letter from a lawyer. Not any lawyer, a lawyer she had retained, quietly, over the preceding weeks, apparently with my son's full knowledge and support. The letter outlined a plan to seek a formal assessment of my cognitive and financial capacity through the Alberta courts. In plain language, they wanted a judge to appoint a trustee to manage my assets because, as the letter put it, there was concern among immediate family members about my ability to make sound financial decisions as I aged. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the kitchen counter very carefully. "Where did this come from?" I asked her. She was standing across the island from me, arms crossed, dressed like she'd come straight from a meeting. My son was standing slightly behind her, which is a detail I noticed and have thought about many times since. "We've been worried," she said, "for a while now." Worried about what, specifically? She listed things. I had given a significant amount to a charity Carol had supported. Yes, I had deliberately, because Carol asked me to before she died, and I wrote it into my intentions explicitly. I had sold the cabin in Jasper. Yes, I had, because I hadn't been there in 2 years and maintaining it alone made no sense. I had updated my will the previous spring. Yes, I had, because my previous will was 12 years old and my financial situation had changed considerably. Each of these things in her telling was evidence of erratic behavior, impulsive decision-making, a pattern of choices that suggested I needed supervision. I looked at my son the whole time she was talking. He didn't meet my eyes once. "You want a trustee to control my money," I said. "We want to make sure you're protected," he said. First words he'd spoken since they'd arrived. From what? Neither of them answered that directly. I told them I'd look into it. I thanked them for stopping by. I walked them to the door. Then I sat down at my kitchen table for a very long time. Here is what they didn't know about me, and what I had never found it necessary to broadcast. I had been quietly building a secondary investment portfolio since 2009. Separate from my pension, separate from the registered accounts, Carol and I had always maintained together. Real estate income trusts, dividend stocks, a few direct property investments, through a numbered company I'd incorporated with the help of a financial planner I'd been working with for 20 years. Kind of patient, boring, long-horizon investing that doesn't make for interesting conversation at dinner, but compounds into something significant if you leave it alone long enough. By the time my daughter-in-law handed me that lawyer's letter, that portfolio was worth approximately $4.3 million. My son and his wife knew about my pension. They knew about the house I lived in, which I owned outright. They knew about a modest savings account I'd mentioned offhandedly once or twice. They did not know about anything else, because it had never come up and I'd never volunteered it. I am not a secretive person by nature, but Carol always said there was wisdom in keeping some things private until there was a reason to share them. She'd grown up watching her parents give too much too soon and spend their final years dependent on people who resented them for it. People treat you differently when they think you have nothing left to give, she told me once. I never want that for us. I hadn't thought about that conversation in years. I thought about it constantly after that evening. The next morning I called my financial planner, a woman named Teresa, who had been managing the portfolio since the beginning. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. I said I needed to start moving some things, restructuring some accounts, and I needed it done carefully and correctly, and without anything that could be characterized later as hasty or irrational. She said she understood. She didn't ask me to explain myself, which is one of the reasons I've worked with her for 2 decades. Over the next 3 weeks, I did several things. I had the house appraised. It came in at just over $900,000, which was higher than I'd expected. The neighborhood had changed considerably since Carol and I bought it in 1991 for $142,000. I contacted a real estate agent I'd known professionally for years and told him I was thinking of selling. He said the market would move it quickly. I said good. I called my own lawyer, not the one who drafted the letter my daughter-in-law gave me, a different one, a man who'd handled my affairs for 15 years, and I told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting, which is also something I appreciate. Then he said, "George, I want to be direct with you. The application they're describing is possible under Alberta law, but it requires clear evidence of incapacity. Given everything you've just told me, I don't think they'd succeed. But the process itself takes time and creates stress and costs money to defend." He paused. "The best thing you can do right now is make decisions that are clearly, demonstrably rational. Document everything, and don't let them freeze your assets before you have a chance to act." I asked him how long I had. He said probably weeks, not months, before they filed anything, assuming they were serious. I told him I understood. I also called my daughter in Vancouver. She's always been different from her brother. More independent, less interested in what Carol and I had accumulated, more focused on what she was building herself. I told her the full picture. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Dad," she said, "do you need me to come?" I told her not yet. I told her I had things handled. "But I want you to know," I said to her, "everything that's happening, because you deserve to know, and because you're not part of it, and I want to make sure it stays that way." She asked about her brother. I said I didn't know what to think about her brother yet, and that was the honest truth. The house sold in 11 days. I'd accepted a conditional offer at $875,000, slightly under appraisal, but the buyers had financing confirmed and wanted possession in 30 days, which suited me perfectly. My son didn't know the house was on the market until the sign went up. He called me within the hour. "What are you doing?" he said. "Selling the house," I said. "Why, that's your home, Dad. You've lived there for 32 years. "Yes, I know. This is exactly what we were worried about. This is impulsive. This is." "Son," I said, and I kept my voice very even because I'd thought about how this conversation would go, and I'd decided how I wanted to conduct myself in it. "I've had that house appraised by a certified appraiser. I've retained a licensed real estate agent. I've accepted an offer from buyers with confirmed financing. I have documentation for every step of this transaction. If you believe this represents impaired judgment, you're welcome to present that argument to a court. I'll be very interested to hear how it lands." He was quiet for a moment. "Where are you going to live?" he said. "I haven't decided yet," I said. "That's the nice thing about having options." What I didn't tell him, what he found out approximately 3 weeks later, was that I had also made changes to the ownership structure of his house. When I'd put in the $260,000 for their down payment in 2018, I had insisted, over my daughter-in-law's objections at the time, on structuring it as a registered loan rather than a gift. She'd pushed back on this. She'd said it felt impersonal, like I didn't trust them. I told her it was simply how I preferred to handle financial arrangements, even with family. Especially with family. She eventually agreed, and we signed a loan agreement, notarized, with repayment terms that had never once been met because I had never pushed for them. That changed. My lawyer sent a formal demand letter for the outstanding balance. $260,000, plus accumulated interest calculated at the agreed rate, which brought the total to just over $310,000. The letter gave them 60 days to arrange repayment or make a written proposal for a structured settlement, failing which I reserved the right to register a lien against the property. The call from my son came on a Saturday morning. He was not calm this time. "You can't do this," he said. "It's a legally registered loan," I said. "You've had 6 years. You said you weren't going to. You never asked for it." "I never asked because I didn't need to. I'm asking now. Dad, we don't have $300,000. "I know," I said. "That's why the letter offers a structured settlement option. Teresa can walk you through what's realista. You're doing this because of the lawyer thing. I'm doing this because circumstances have changed, and it's a legitimate debt. If you'd like to discuss the lawyer thing separately, I'm available for that conversation as well. But I'd prefer to do it in person, without your wife in the room, because I think there are some things you and I need to say to each other directly." He didn't respond to that. "I'll wait to hear from your lawyer," I said. The meeting I'd proposed, just the two of us, happened a week later. He drove to the furnished apartment I'd been renting in a different part of Edmonton, a tidy 2-bedroom in a quiet building near a river valley trail I'd started walking every morning. He sat across from me at a small table with a coffee he barely touched, and he looked, honestly, like a man who hadn't been sleeping. I told him I wasn't angry. That was true. I'd moved through the anger quickly and come out somewhere that felt more like grief, which I told him as well because I thought he deserved to hear it plainly. I said, "I need to understand how we got here, not your wife's version, yours." It took a while. He was defensive at first, and then less so, and then eventually he said something that I hadn't expected. He said that after Carol died, he'd become afraid. Not for himself, but for me. He said he'd watched me become quieter, more self-contained, spending more time alone. He said he'd started to worry that I was making decisions from a place of grief rather than clarity. He said his wife had framed the legal option as something they were doing for me. I listened to all of this. Then I said, "Did you actually believe that? That I needed a trustee because I was grieving your mother?" He was quiet. "Or did you believe her when she said it, because it was easier than asking me directly?" He didn't answer that, which was its own kind of answer. I told him this, that I had loved his mother for 40 years and I was not finished grieving her, and I would not be finished for some time. But that grief is not the same as incapacity, and anyone who claimed otherwise was either ignorant or self-interested, and he needed to decide which category his wife fell into. I told him that I had built the life we'd all benefited from, through careful choices made over a very long time, and that I had never once needed anyone's supervision to manage my own affairs, and that the moment I did, I would ask for help. I told him I was still his father and I still loved him. But I also told him that trust, once broken in this particular way, does not come back on anyone's timeline except the person who lost it. He cried. I hadn't seen him cry since Carol's funeral. I let him. When he left, I walked down to the river trail, and I walked for an hour in the cold November air, and I thought about my wife and what she would have said about all of this. I think she would have said exactly what I'd said to our son. She always believed in naming things plainly. In the months that followed, several things resolved. My son and his wife did not pursue the trustee application. My lawyer confirmed quietly that the file had been closed. I don't know what conversations happened in their house. I didn't ask. The loan repayment was settled through a structured arrangement that involved them refinancing their mortgage and repaying me in 2 installments over 18 months. I did not charge them the full interest. I reduced it to what the original principal had been, $260,000. and I put that money directly into an education trust for their 2 children, my grandchildren, with conditions that protected it from anyone's control until the kids turned 19. My daughter came to visit that winter. She stayed for 10 days, and we cooked together every night and went to the Art Gallery of Alberta one afternoon. And she made me watch a movie I thought I would hate, and I didn't hate it. Before she left, she said, "Dad, you handled all of this so well." I told her I wasn't sure about that. I told her I'd handled it the only way I knew how, which was one step at a time with documentation. She laughed at that in a way that sounded like her mother. I found a condo, ground floor, facing west, with a small private patio where I put 2 chairs, one for me and one for whoever might visit. The building has a workshop in the basement that residents can book, and I've started making small furniture pieces again, something I hadn't done since the kids were young. A side table, a small bench, things that take time and concentration and result in something you can put your hands on. I am not unhappy. That's not a small thing to be able to say. I still walk the River Valley trails most mornings. In January, that means headlamp and 4 layers and temperatures that would make most people stay inside. But there is something about the cold here that I've always respected. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't, and it doesn't accommodate you just because you'd prefer otherwise. You dress for what it actually is, and you go anyway, and you're better for it. Carol would have hated the January walks. She'd have had the kettle on when I got back, and she'd have shaken her head at my red nose and said something dry and affectionate about my inability to stay warm. And I'd have sat down across from her with my hands wrapped around a mug, and there would have been nowhere else in the world I needed to be. She was right about the fine print. She was right about a lot of things. I still read it, every time.